great. I love how you're inspiring and educating and instructing the the leaders of tomorrow at FGS. And thank you for inviting me here to speak again. So today I'll be talking about the role of the humanities in scientific advancement and why the humanities and social sciences play just as important a role in society as STEM. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Luis. Um, I recently graduated high school and I'm an incoming freshman, college freshman at Mount Allison University in Sackville. I originally come from the Philippines and I'm moving there later this year for college. I used to want to be a scientist, but for the reasons that I'm going to discuss in this PowerPoint, at midway into high school, I made the decision to kind of switch paths, the humanities and social sciences, and now I plan to pursue a career in law or journalism or policy or related field. I spoke at FGS 2021 last year, actually, about agrotechnology. I have previously spoken also about environmental welfare at the University of Philippines Cebu, about educational equity at the Rotary Club of Alabang Madrigal Business Park, and I am a 2 times finalist in a business pitch contest in my country. I've also spoken about youth activism and neurodiversity advocacy on 2 different podcasts. So now that that's out of the way, Sophia, I think there are people in the lobby. So now that
Yeah.
I've introduced myself, I'm really honored and excited to speak before all of you, and hopefully leave a few things for you to think about. So I'd like to go over to the main topic before I get into why the humanities and social sciences are just as important as the sciences in society. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the societal perceptions of humanities and science as it currently stands. So, in modern day society, the sciences are largely prioritized over the humanities, as many of you may have noticed. I'm not saying the sciences are not useful. They are very, very useful, without a doubt. They really lead to driving forward and advancing society. But I think personally that in some places and in some subcultures, it's gotten to a point that people really don't see the value of the social sciences and humanities anymore, and I don't really think that's a good thing. So, first of all, before we start, I want to ask you all a question. And I get that this might not be very representative of the general population because the camp is literally called Future Generations of Sciences. But out of the audience here, who is planning to pursue a career in the humanities or social science? So anything from journalism to law to psychology to policy, any of that. You can
Yeah, you can raise your
say
hands
you can
or
speak up
write
if
in
you're
chat.
yeah. Um Anyway, so next, who's planning to pursue a career in the sciences? Okay, anyway.
Yeah,
So,
it's much more people who raise their hands in sciences.
all right. So, basically, I honestly could not see because of the way
Yeah,
you are
yeah, I
presenting,
know.
but
They
like,
raise their hands.
was it more people in science or humanities?
Yes, more people in science.
Okay, so yeah, as I said, that might not be representative of the general population because, future generations of scientists, but in general, looking at the number of people graduating with has bachelor's degrees versus the number of people graduating with STEM bachelor's degrees in the US in 2018, has was just 190,000-ish. STEM was almost 400,000. And that's actually a new trend. It's not something that's always been there. Like if you go back to 2009, Has and STEM, the number of people graduating with bachelor's degrees in each field were pretty much equal in the US. Um, 220,000 for Haas, I believe, and 240 for STEM. But over the 10 years, the number of STEM bachelor's degrees doubled, and the number of Haas bachelor's degrees went down by like 15%. And it's not just a trend in the US, it's actually a trend in a lot of places. For example, in the UK, the students are increasingly tending towards STEM, and there are less and less people studying the humanities and social sciences. Again, I think it's very good that I think STEM is very good and very useful to society, but I think, at least it's my opinion, that at this point, people have lost sight of the value of the humanities and how it interacts with the sciences in society. So now that we've seen how students and in general the masses tend to value science over the humanities more and more, let's take a look at what the government thinks of such matters. Now, these were the budget requests from the Office of the President to the US Congress for the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Science Foundation this fiscal year. Now, the National Endowment for the Humanities is an independent federal agency dedicated to promoting humanities and arts and cultures in American society. Uh, is someone speaking?
No, I think it was nothing.
All right. Along with partially funding along with all the public funding or most of the public funding for humanities and social sciences research. The NSF is very similar. It's dedicated to promoting interest in the sciences and technology in American society and for the public funding of a lot of STEM research. Now, the presidential budget request to the US Congress for the NSF was over $10 billion this fiscal year. On the other hand, their budget request for the NEH was a mere $200 million. That's literally a 50th of the budget of the NSF. Though actually, while I was searching up these figures, I expected the difference to be maybe threefold, fivefold, but apparently at this point, the US government, at least by this metric, seems to value science 50 times more than the humanities, and that, and in fact, another interesting bit of trivia is that in the US, if you're an international student graduating with a major in a STEM field, you can stay for 3 years after graduation to look for work. If you're graduating with a degree in any other field, such as the humanities, you can only stay for 1 year. And it's not just the US, the UK has increasingly been defunding humanities and social sciences education in favor of STEM education. A lot of Europe has been doing the same thing. I can think of Spain as an example. So it's really not just the masses that are increasingly valuing STEM over the humanities, it's also the government and institutions. So, but it's not just the government either, it's also the media. So here in the media, in pop culture, nowadays especially, people in the lobby, science is increasingly portrayed as something cool, something that's an admiral career to get into when you want to grow up. And I do agree with that, but a lot of times when pop culture is trying to make that point, it ends up dismissing the humanities. And in the first picture here, from the Big Bang Theory, you can see Sheldon Cooper at Caltech dismissing sociology. He calls it a pseudo discipline, and he makes fun of the inhumanities as a sort of umbrella term for anything that's not part of STEM. And yeah, Sheldon is often portrayed as very immature and arrogant and immature about a lot of stuff. But I think in that episode, even the side characters, they did kind of call him out on being harsh and petty, but they did agree with his general point of view. And yeah, while he is immature, he usually ends up being right. So it's kind of like, that's just one example. And in the second picture is a picture of Foundation, an Apple TV series, very recently, based off the Isaac Asimov works. And I actually really like it, but there was this particular scene scene where the titular character mentions that scientists were the ones who built the bridges and the infrastructure and basically all the workings of the society there. And I don't really agree with that. She said that the politicians basically didn't do anything and the scientists did all of it. So sure, maybe the scientists designed those bridges and infrastructure and built it, although I guess the construction workers built it, but it was the government who provided the funding for that research. It was the government who provided the funding to build that. It's the government who presumably allows the people to use it. And yes, the whole point of that series is that the government there is corrupt, but it's also very much undervaluing the contribution that fields other than STEM have to society. So there, not both the government and the media tend to value science and undervalue fields like the humanities, and part of that translates into the masses tending to value STEM more. I'll get into everyone's reasons for overvaluing STEM and undervaluing the humanities later. But now I want to provide like specific definitions of HAS and STEM and compare them to each other so that we can really have a better idea of what their functions in society are. So first of all, HAS stands for Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. So in general, the humanities and arts and social sciences are the rational or subjective study of human culture, arts, history, behavior, and relationships. The social sciences are also concerned with the objective study of these things, but it still tends to be more subjective. Now, science and mathematics are the empirical or objective study of the physical and natural world. So rather than studying human behavior or how individuals interact with society, science and math tend to study the observable non-human environment around us. So that includes, for example, studying the atoms that make everything up, or studying the environment and ecosystems around us, or all of those things. And technology and engineering are the disciplines that make use of science and mathematics, these fundamental fields, to develop structures, machines, and processes. So they're the ones who invent everything and build everything. Humanities and social sciences include fields like philosophy, political science, economics, sociology, psychology, and more, while STEM includes mathematics, computer science, physics, chemistry, biology. So notice when I put emphasis on the fact that HAS is mainly the subjective study of human behavior in culture and arts, whereas STEM is the objective study of the world around us. That means that basically what STEM does is it observes the quantifiable around us and it draws conclusions from that and only that, without any prior paradigms or mindsets or lens. Humanities, very fundamentally, when studying human behavior, it views it through this value system, this paradigm, and that makes it yet less subjective. But that's also why the humanities are the ones that shape society's opinions on things, society's mindset, society's wisdom, because STEM inherently does not have a value system. It is very good at providing society with this irrefutable, undeniable knowledge, but it doesn't really add to our wisdom. It gives us the knowledge, the skills, and the tools objectively to improve society. The more subjective humanities and social sciences are what give us our values. They're what give us the wisdom and the mindset, and also, in effect, the policies to use the tools that STEM gives us to improve society. Now, an analogy to this would be the body being society, blood being the humanities, and oxygen being STEM. So society, of course, needs oxygen to sustain it, to give it energy, to keep it moving, to keep it driving, keep going forward. But oxygen, in turn, needs blood to help distribute it throughout the body. When oxygen enters through your lungs, it is put into the blood, and the blood takes it to all the organs it needs to go to. Blood also helps with homeostasis or regulating the body. So essentially, in this role, STEM is oxygen. STEM gives the tools and the energy to sustain society and keep it moving forward, to help it grow. The humanities makes sure the sciences enter the body in a way that's efficient and good. They make sure these tools go to all the right places they need to go. And in addition to regulating the sciences, they also help with, as blood does, general homeostasis. They help to regulate the economy, which is a separate issue from STEM. That's basically the body regulating its body temperature. Just like blood helps with the immune system, HAS is the field that helps fight off corruption and poverty. And have you ever wondered why when people lose blood, they become fatigued? Because usually you don't think of blood as being the energy source for the body, right? But like oxygen is the energy source for the body, right? Oxygen is what you breathe in and breathe out when you're exerting a lot of energy. But when you lose blood, you begin to become fatigued because no matter how much oxygen you're breathing in and out, there isn't enough blood to distribute it throughout the body in the proper way. Similarly, if society continues to neglect HAS and focus so much on STEM, STEM is basically going to oversaturate society, and there's not going to be enough people in the humanities and social sciences to make sure it helps society in an effective way. I know it's not a perfect analogy, but that is essentially the gist of things. So if that's really the case, if the humanities and social sciences are this important to society, why haven't more people taken notice of that? Why don't people seem to realize that? Why does society tend to value STEM at the cost of the humanities? Well, in effect, like I said, it's a rather new trend, right? Like in 2009, the number of STEM and HAS bachelor's degrees were pretty much equal. Now it's a twofold difference. That's largely in part because society is becoming more and more technology driven as we progress throughout the 21st century. For example, everyone has phones nowadays. People have to use computers for work. There are billboards, giant billboards in the sky with big flashy digital advertisements. There's more and more technology being integrated into medicine than ever. The, the world is becoming more and more driven by technology, and it's very apparent at this point that STEM is the driving factor behind that. So if you get an average person and they see how much technology is being integrated into the world, they see an engineer, they're like, oh, that 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 engineer is gonna build a better phone or build better medical technology. These are the people driving our society forward. Whereas the benefits of HAS are more abstract, they're more indirect. A lot of times, if people aren't particularly learned about this topic, they don't even know what the specific benefits of HAS are. For example, if someone sees someone studying political science, they'll go, oh, this guy's studying politics. Okay, how does that help me in everyday life? I mean, maybe they go on to become a politician and steal all my money. I don't know. So yeah, the benefits of HAS in that respect, they're more abstract. But what a lot of people don't realize is that, okay, this engineer builds this new life-saving technology. Brilliant. Who's the one who makes sure that this technology finds its ways into hospitals? That's mainly the job of, for example, lawyers. Who's the one who makes sure, in general, that healthcare is available to the masses? Because there are a lot of places where healthcare is mainly only available to the wealthy. So, however many life-saving technologies you integrate into there, you're not going to be able to reach everyone. You can develop more and more life-saving technologies, but you need policymakers to make sure that healthcare is accessible to everyone, even the underprivileged. So yeah, maybe the engineer develops the new life-saving technology, but it's the policymaker who makes sure that healthcare is available to everyone. Scientists, that's not the job of scientists. That's the job of the humanities. So, and I think in general, also another issue is that society as a whole values being able to improve over knowing how. People tend to think that, okay, there's so many problems in our society. We need the new tools to fix them, and I guess we'll know how to use those tools when we get them. But the problem is, okay, what's one of the biggest problems the world faces today? Climate change, right? And what do people think is the solution is? Better clean energy technology, right? But what people don't realize is at this point, there are actually a lot of clean energy technologies that are just as efficient and just as cheap as fossil fuels in the long run. And one of the main reasons these clean energy technologies are not being integrated into society is not because the technology is deficient, but because the fossil fuel industry is so large and there are a lot of workers in the fossil fuel industry who don't want to lose their jobs. So they don't vote people into office who will implement clean energy. So at this point, it's not a STEM issue, it's not a technology issue, it's a policy issue, it's a mindset issue. So society values being able to improve over knowing how, but knowing how to improve is crucial. There's no point in having all this capability if you don't know how to use it. So of, by the way, I am not saying STEM is not important. STEM saves lives. STEM improves society. That is a fact. And only someone who's crazy will not accept that. But I'm saying that the humanities and social sciences are just as important, and society needs to recognize that. So I guess now that we've established that, I'm going to talk about several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how the roles that STEM and has play in them, both now and throughout history. So I'd like to start with healthcare, which is SDG number 3, good health and well-being. So when someone thinks of medicine, they think of doctors, right? They think of engineers and scientists who develop this medical technology, and they're right. Like since in the mid 20th century onwards, there have been like huge advances in medical technology that have basically caused lifespans to shoot up from life expectancies to shoot up from 40 years on average to well above 80. Science saves lives that way. But while science has led to these miraculous advances in medical technology, that doesn't mean that public healthcare improves. Healthcare in a lot of places, such as my own country, the Philippines, healthcare is widely unavailable to the underprivileged. And even when it is available, a lot of times people aren't educated enough to understand when they need to and don't need to go to the hospital or a clinic. So the humanities plays just as much of a role in making sure that these new advances in medical technology are available to everyone, and that's just as important. So I'm going to start with going all the way back to the start of society, ancient Egypt. Yes, I know Mesopotamia was first, but I'm just going to use ancient Egypt. So ancient Egypt had relatively basic medicine and medical technology compared to ancient Greece and Rome. First of all, ancient Egypt was, for the most part, a lot older than Greece and Rome, but even when Greece and Rome rose and Egypt coexisted with them, Greece and Rome were the technological juggernauts. They led the world in science and technology, even more than Egypt. So Egypt was never more, well, ancient Egypt at least, was never more medically advanced than Greece and Rome. Their life expectancy, on average, excluding people who died very early, like in childbirth, was 35 years. The, that that when that's the average life expectancy for everyone in the population, but because most of the population was the masses and the wealthy was only the top few percent, 35 years is basically the age at which an average lower class or middle class worker in ancient Egypt would have died. Even the wealthy in ancient Egypt usually died before turning 55 years old. There were even kings who died before turning 20. So it really proves that, yeah, they didn't really have the medical technology to extend people's life that much. There was kind of pretty much equal healthcare between the wealthy and the slaves. And like it was a very low power distance culture, not a lot of inequality. So yes, there were slaves, but even these slaves And there's some historical evidence that suggests that they weren't slaves at all in certain periods, but were actually paid. Some of these slaves, like the ones who built the pyramids, they had access to state-sponsored healthcare. That's more than we can say about many present-day countries. Like, compared to the best medicine ancient Egypt had available, they had better public healthcare for the lower class than a lot of countries today. And now, let's go to ancient Greece and Rome. So there was advanced medicine there compared to ancient Egypt. Like, even when even in the later parts of ancient Egypt, when they coexisted with Greece and Rome always had the most advanced technology, most advanced science. However, the life expectancy for the masses was 5 years lower, 30 years. And you might not think that's a significant difference, but it's actually very statistically significant. That's the difference between like the the country with the highest life expectancy today and like the country with the 50th highest life expectancy today. 5 years is big when we're talking about these kinds of figures. And the very wealthy there often live to be over 65 years old, whereas in ancient Egypt, they usually died before turning 55, remember? So this really proves they had better medicine that could extend people's lifespans. But because they had a high power distance culture, there was a lot of inequality. Most of this healthcare was only available to the wealthy, or at least the upper middle class. The lower class didn't really have access to this healthcare, despite them technically being more democratic than Egypt. Yes, Greece had the first democracy, but it was still fundamentally a lot more classist than ancient Egypt, which is why, even with their vastly more advanced science, their life expectancy was the same or even a bit lower on average, at least for the masses. And this trend continues throughout history in general. So if you look at pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, which is basically that's a region that stretches from like central Mexico in North America down to Nicaragua in the middle of South America today. So that those were basically the ancient American societies before Columbus came and discovered America. So that included the Aztecs, the Mayans, and several other ancient civilizations. They had very basic medicine compared to England and other European countries at the time, but their life expectancy was actually 40 years for the masses. And even the wealthy usually died before turning 60, which is actually even the wealthy there, the wealthy, because there wasn't a lot of classism, had lower life expectancies than in ancient Greece, like 1,500 years ago, because it really shows they didn't really have very advanced medicine. But there was a low power distance. There's evidence that these Mesoamerican societies had the first true democracies as we know them. As you can see in the picture I've included, their public plazas, squares for debates. They really democratically elected leaders, and there it was a very collectivist society with very little classism, and there was basically equal healthcare for everyone. Now, going to medieval England, they had far, far, far more advanced medicine compared to Mesoamerica. These Mesoamerican societies, they basically had the medical advancement of Greece and Rome 1,500 years ago. Middle Ages England and the rest of Europe, they advanced vastly since then. However, even though they're wealthy, often live to be over 75 years old, which is a figure comparable to people's lifespans today, their life expectancy for everyone, the masses, was just 35 years. Now, why is that? You'd expect their life expectancy to be much higher than Mesoamerica, right? But it's because they had a high power distance in medieval England and other countries in Europe. There were feudal classes, feudal systems with lords and kings and nobles on top, and most overwhelming majority of the population were peasants who weren't really treated well, slaves basically. So even though they had much more advanced medicine, these slaves probably received worse healthcare than in ancient Egypt, uh, 1,500 years ago. So it really shows that the issue here, of course, scientific advancement in medicine is an issue. Like with all these scientific advancements, people's lifespans have shot up massively. But an equally important issue, not more, not less, an equally important issue is making sure that this healthcare is available to everyone, not just the wealthy, not just the upper classes. It's the responsibility of the sciences to improve medical technology, make sure people live longer. It's the responsibility of the humanities and social sciences, policymakers, and the like to make sure that everyone has access. Now, these are historical examples, so let's move on to something more modern. Let's go on to see the life expectancies and healthcare systems of countries today. So this chart shows the life expectancy at birth for the top 10 countries in public healthcare. That doesn't mean the most medically advanced countries, by the way. That is purely referring to the healthcare system, how accessible healthcare is to the lower classes, how much people can afford it, how good the public healthcare is there. So as you can see here, the the rankings are pretty consistently high. Now you switch over to the top 10 countries in medical science, and you see that the numbers are for life expectancy are consistently lower. By the way, the asterisk numbers, asterisk countries such as Japan, France, Austria, those are the countries that were also on this list. See, Japan, Great Britain, Austria, France. So just looking at the mean here, the mean life expectancy out of these top 10 countries in public healthcare, excluding Taiwan, for which there is no data because it's not officially recognized as a country by many institutions. It's between the ninth and 10th top countries in the world in terms of life expectancy. You go to this chart, and the mean is between the 22nd and 23rd if you count all of these countries, and then between the 34th and the 35th if you exclude the countries that are also on this list. And the lowest ranking country here in terms of life expectancy is Great Britain at 28th place. Whereas the lowest ranking countries here are 54th and 59th place. Now, the US has the most advanced medical technology in the world. In fact, in 2019, it output 6 times as much research in medical technology as any other country. However, because it doesn't have a good public healthcare system, it's just 54th in the world in terms of life expectancy. Whereas going over to here, a country such as Denmark does not really particularly have very advanced medical technology. They don't output a lot of medical research, and yet they're 21st. Same goes for Korea or France. So, oh wait, no, France outputs a lot of medical research, but yeah, Korea, Austria, Spain, so it really shows that just because you have good medical technology, it doesn't necessarily mean that life expectancy is going to be higher. Why? Because simply by having good medical technology, you don't ensure that everyone in the country has access to that medical technology. The poor, the homeless, the underprivileged, the not homeless who are still kind of poor and don't have enough money to pay for private healthcare, you know? That's what happens in the US. That's what happens in China. There's they have amazing medical technology. Like China's even cloning people now or genetically modifying babies, but you know, what's the point of that if the poor don't have access to that healthcare, right? Um, yeah, so moving on, what are the specific barriers to health equity? Well, first of all, let me clarify that humans' maximum lifespan has actually pretty much plateaued in recent years. There have been centuries of medical advancement, and yes, there's still some stuff that needs solving. No one's found a cure for cancer. Well, no real cure. No one's found a cure for Alzheimer's or a lot of these diseases. But for the most part, lifespans have stopped really increasing because our medical technology is already very, very good. And 99% of the problems that someone has, we can solve them. The primary obstacle now is not developing better medical technology. Of course, that's necessary. We all want to cure cancer, right? We all want to cure Alzheimer's. But the primary obstacle now to making sure that people get good healthcare is making sure that the lower and middle classes have access to public healthcare. It's making sure that the even the poor have access to the best or some of the best medicine that society has to offer. It's making sure that even the undereducated are aware that sometimes when they have a fever or some other sickness and it's really prolonged and it's really bad, it's better for them to go to the hospital or a clinic than keep going to work. So to summarize it all, the main issues by now to health equity are really economic inequality because people cannot really pay for good healthcare. So because of income inequality, the existence of the underprivileged means that they can't afford good healthcare. Another issue is the integration of private healthcare. Yes, private healthcare is better than public healthcare in terms of the medicine that it presents, but people also have to pay for it. Most middle class people can't even afford good private healthcare, let alone the lower class, right? The more a society's healthcare infrastructure comes to rely on private healthcare, the less affordable healthcare within that country is to the masses. That's another issue. The third issue is insufficient public health education. There are a lot of people who are underprivileged who work every day to pay the bills. You know, they have to go to work or they don't get their next meal, but they get sick. They have to go to the clinic, you know? They like really, really sick. A lot of people, they just keep going to work. They have to earn their wages. They're not educated enough about public health to understand that it's really necessary to get healthcare. Like even people living in places where there is access to public healthcare, they're not educated enough to go get it. They don't even know that they have access to it in some cases. So that being said, hang on, sorry. That being said, here are some ways for tasks to help tackle the issue of health inequity. First, adopt progressive taxation laws to reduce inequality in society. The less poor people there are, the less underprivileged there are, the more people will be able to pay for public or private healthcare, good healthcare in general. Another is to replace opportunist private healthcare providers with universal healthcare systems. Again, private healthcare is better in terms of quality, but way less accessible. And even in places where they do have ostensibly public healthcare, like my own country, the Philippines, technically everyone has access to public healthcare here, but it's really bad. It'll barely cover anything. You know, the country needs to make sure that there's more emphasis on universal and public healthcare that is good. And finally, third, policymakers and people in the education industry, which is a problem for HAS, not STEM, needs to make sure that public healthcare is promoted more in pre-tertiary public schools. Pre-tertiary, by the way, refers to schools before college, right? Because college is tertiary education, high school is secondary. So basically from kindergarten to grade 12 or grade 13 if you're from the UK or Cambridge systems. So those are really ways for the humanities to tackle health inequity. Of course, developing more medical technology is crucial, but health inequity and bad healthcare can't be solved solely by throwing a bunch of scientists at it. You also need to remember that policymakers, change makers in the educational area, the healthcare industry are just as important as the doctors and the medical researchers who work to save lives. And yeah, so becoming a doctor is not the only way to save a life through the healthcare industry. There are other ways. And I think people tend to forget that sometimes. So now that we've established that, I I want to say that maybe we should take a 5-minute break for everyone to, I don't know, go to the bathroom, get water, get snacks, because I know this is a 90-minute lecture or
Yeah.
80 minutes, and you all might get kind of tired, bored with what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Are you all bored? Hope you're not bored.
No.
Um, are you all good? Hey, you can speak up.
Yeah, we're good. This is really
Yeah, sure.
interesting. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, so anyway, let's be back at 9:20. Let's continue. I'm gonna talk about the role of the humanities in clean energy next. So I guess let's return at 9:20. You can go to the bathroom, get water. Yeah. So I hope I'm not boring you, and I hope it's engaging enough.
No,
So
no,
yeah,
very
I'll
useful.
I'll be back at 9:20.
So interesting.
See you all then. guys. Just in case people aren't back yet, I'll type it in the chat. How do I? Oh, wrong. Wait. In case anyone's not back, I will resume at 9:22. See you then.
Yeah, I wrote in our Telegram chat that they should come back.
Thanks. Can you tell them, just in case they're late, I'll resume at 9:22.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks. Hello, welcome back. All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you had a nice intermission. I um I hope everyone's got to do everything they needed to do. Maybe you got a snack or something. So now I'll be continuing with the presentation, and this time I'll be tackling how STEM and HAS both play a role in clean energy and climate action. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a what have you learned section later on, as well as a Q&A in case anyone has any discussion or reactions or insights or questions they want to share. So I guess you can look forward to that. Anyway, so now, as we all know, climate change is one of the biggest problems facing humanity today, right? Maybe the biggest. And clean energy is a very effective way to solve this. Solar energy, hydroelectric energy, wind power, geothermal energy. And one of the reasons that people don't use clean energy as much as fossil fuels is that clean energy sources are often viewed as less viable than fossil fuels like petroleum or coal in more ways than one, not just technology-wise, but also economy-wise. However, the technology behind clean energy or renewable energy, it's not the only obstacle. Far from it. There are lots of issues with policy and mindset that society has to tackle as well if we want to solve clean energy. So first of all, let's take a look at renewable energy in Germany versus the United States. So in 2020, 44.5% of all of Germany's electricity production came from clean energy, as opposed to the United States, where the proportion was just 19.8%. Now, why could this be? Maybe Germany has better renewable energy technology than the US? No, the US actually contributed 7 times as much to the global community in terms of environmental sciences research as Germany in 2019. 7 times as much. And even then, clean energy technology is shared across the world. So even if Germany did have some innovative clean energy technology, they'd share it with the US and vice versa. And by this metric that I constructed using data from the World Bank, the United States has 9 times the amount of resources as Germany it needs to create renewable energy. So Basically, the reason I'm including population density and the like is because clean energy requires land area for, the more land area, the more solar energy hits the place, the more land area, the more geothermal spots there will be, the more land area, the more running water there will be, and population density, because of course, the more people use electricity, the more people there are, the more electricity will be needed, and the more energy will be needed. So by that metric, the United States has 9 times the amount of resources with all factors accounted for as Germany needs to produce renewable energy. So more research, more resources, but only 19.8%, not even a fifth of their electricity production came from renewables, whereas in Germany it's almost half. So what's the difference? So the answer really mainly boils down to public perception of climate change and renewable energy. So, first of all, in 2018, Germany was ranked third in the world for being at risk of climate change. Very, very high. My country, the Philippines, was actually ranked second. So that's kind of worrying. But yeah, in 2018, Germany ranked very high in terms of the at-risk countries for climate change, which may be why a lot of their citizens are very concerned because they know they're going to be affected by climate change. And 77% of their citizens before the Russian invasion of Ukraine cited climate change as the biggest threat to humanity. Later on, after, Putin invaded Ukraine, the that figure shot down all the way to like 28%, but before that, 77% of citizens thought climate change was not only real, but the biggest threat to humanity in the 21st century. And the government of Germany plans to switch completely to renewable energy by 2035 for all of their electricity consumption. And virtually all of their citizens and Paul support it. Like I'm talking 98, 99% of their citizens really support that plan. And Zofia, someone's in the lobby.
Yeah, I admitted them.
There's still never mind. And lower poverty also translates into less fossil fuel workers that because of course the more people in poverty there are, the more blue collar workers there will be, and the more people will turn to the fossil fuel industry, which needs a lot of blue collar workers. So because there's less poverty and thus less fossil fuel workers, there are less people more in opposition to clean energy because it will phase out fossil fuel jobs. Now, onto Americans' views on climate change. They were 12th in the Climate Risk Index in 2018. Still pretty high, but not as high as Germany. And 31% of American citizens believe that climate change is a hoax. Whereas in Germany, 77% before the Russian invasion of Ukraine believed it was humanity's biggest challenge. 31% of Americans don't even think it's real. 67% of their citizens support the use of fossil fuels in addition to renewable energy past 2050. So while Germany is planning to switch to renewable energy entirely by 2035, in the US, citizens think that even once renewable energy is definitely very viable by 2050, fossil fuels should still continue to be part of the industry. Why? Well, this is because the US has higher poverty, which translates into more blue collar workers, translating into more fossil fuel workers. So even among the fossil fuel workers who believe that climate change is real, they don't want to lose their jobs. So they think, fossil fuels should still be part of the industry. And technically, the official figures released by the US and German governments, the US poverty rate is slightly below the German poverty rate, but that's because the US uses a different metric for their poverty rate than Germany. A study by the OECD found that if you use the same metric for both countries, the American poverty rate shoots up to like 18%, while Germany stays at 10%. So yes, there's more poverty, more fossil fuel workers. But well, we have to ask, is Germany just an outlier? Aren't most countries like the US, like even if they have the resources, they're not really prioritizing renewable energy as much? The answer is no. 98.4% of Norway's electricity production comes from renewables. That's a huge, huge, huge number. Like literally, there's only there's under a 50th, there's under a 60th of their electricity only that comes from fossil fuels. Most of it is from renewables. And yes, again, running the numbers, the US has more resources, factoring in land area and population, of course, than Norway for renewable energy. Bhutan and Suriname are the first two carbon negative countries. That means that the amount of carbon dioxide that their their fauna sucks in from the atmosphere and puts out again as oxygen is more than the amount of carbon dioxide that they emit from fossil fuels or emissions. And Bhutan is a transition, both of them, Bhutan and Suriname, they're transition economies. That means they're not quite developing countries, but they're not developed countries either. They're somewhere in the middle, transitioning from developing to developed. It's kind of like Turkey. Uh, and yet both of them have had the will and the money to switch to almost entirely renewables. So why can't the US? So the main barrier here, so these are the main barriers here. And again, they're not so much STEM issues as they are HAS issues. The opponents of renewable energy, they mainly cite three factors. First is the short-term cost of building renewable energy production facilities. For example, hydroelectric dams or solar panels. It's very expensive to build these things, and they cite short-term cost as an issue there because they're very costly to build in the short term. There are less investors willing to build them, and it'll take a big chunk out of the government budget in the short term. Another thing they cite is the impact on blue collar workers because again, a lot of if there's lots of poverty, there will be a lot of people working in the blue collar industry, and a lot of them will be in the fossil fuel industry. So even if it's viable to switch to renewable energy, a lot of people think that it's better to keep using fossil fuels, even though it'll irreparably damage our planet forever because people don't want to lose their jobs. And the third thing they state, which is really just crazy at this point, is exaggeration by scientists. The crazy climate change deniers, or people who think it's real, but that, oh, I don't know, it's not caused by humans, or maybe it is caused by humans, but so what? We're all gonna live another 500 years, even if we do nothing about this. So yeah, exaggeration. But actually, to tackle the first point, many renewable energy sources are less costly than fossil fuels in the long run. For example, yes, it's very expensive to build a hydroelectric power plant because, we already have all the infrastructure and buildings that we need to process fossil fuels. But in the long run, a hydroelectric dam is actually less costly to maintain than using fossil fuels because, using fossil fuels, you have to extract it out of the ground. You need people to process it, all of that stuff. Hydroelectric dam, you pretty much build it, stick a crew there, and it does all the work itself for the most part. So, it's less costly to maintain in the long run than uh, fossil fuel burning. So the main issue there is really the fact that investors and financial institutions who will invest money in renewable energy projects, they're risk averse. They don't want to risk investing a lot of money into into production of clean energy technology because if it doesn't work out, they lose their money. So that's the issue. Another one is misinformation among the masses. That's what leads people to think that there's exaggeration somehow by scientists, which is just not true at all. And finally, the lack of government involvement. A lot of these issues can be solved if the government is just more involved, like in Germany or Norway or Bhutan. But a lot of places like the US, the UK, my country, the Philippines, the government doesn't care that much to get involved in these issues. So what are the solutions? First, right, one of the main issues is that financial institutions and investors are risk averse and they don't want to invest in clean energy technology, so it never gets built. One of the government solutions is to adopt subsidies and tax breaks for these things. So subsidies to people building renewable energy and tax breaks for the investors so that they don't have to pay as many taxes. And that will really encourage people to invest more in clean energy and build it because the technology is perfectly viable at this point for the most part. You just need people willing to invest in it, people willing to build it. And that's the main issue there. Another issue is to stimulate other blue collar sectors like, say, manufacturing to phase out jobs in the fossil fuel industry. If you open up more jobs in manufacturing, which will eventually be good for the economy as well, you'll more blue collar workers will gravitate there than the fossil fuel industry, and people will be less against switching over to renewables. And finally, promote climate education in public schools before college so that the youth of today, the leaders of tomorrow, all of you and me, will learn to that climate action is really important. Even the underprivileged going to public schools, they'll learn that climate action is a must. The tomorrow will suffer if we don't take action today. And yeah, so that'll combat a lot of the misinformation present in society where people don't want to switch over to renewables because they don't think climate change is real. So now I want to talk about SDG number 10, reduced inequalities in the world. So, of course, we all know advancements in technology, they've strengthened the economy, right? They lead to technological growth, new sectors in the economy, all this booming economy, right? But the thing is, not everyone benefits equally from this growth. There's economic growth and there's economic equity, which means that the people who need which means that everyone gets treated fairly and equally, and you don't always get that from growth. So let's take a look at this chart of the Gini coefficient of Iceland from 1993 to 2014. Okay, so 1993, that was the year that the World Wide Web got released, basically the internet. So in 1993 and the succeeding years, you can see income inequality shoot up a bit because, the World Wide Web got launched. And I'll explain why those advancements in technology lead to greater inequality later. But for all you need to know right now is that let's take it as a given that advancements in technology lead to an increasing risk for growing inequality. So after the World Wide Web was launched, those first few years, inequality shot up a bit and then it leveled out because the Icelandic government implemented the right policies to make sure it didn't increase anymore. And I'll get to that later. Then the mid 2000s, social media started to go on the rise. Income inequality shot up a bit, but it actually went down again because the government of Iceland is very effective at making sure everyone is treated fairly. Now let's go to a chart of the US. So go here to in between 1990 and 1995. That's when the internet was invented, right? Well, not invented. That's when the internet was released. So yeah, right there at 1993, income inequality shoots up massively. It's almost vertical. Then it levels out again. In the mid 2000s, it begins to really rise again because of the rise of social media, and it keeps rising and it keeps rising because the government doesn't do that much about it. So now I'm going to explain why the Icelandic government is more effective at treating this inequality than the US government. And after that, I'm going to go on to why technology leads to an increased risk for inequality. So, first of all, in Iceland, the 2021 Global Innovation Index rank was 17th, so that the 87th percentile in terms of technological advancement. Their GDP per capita was $59,000, and they have a more socialist mixed market, meaning basically capitalism is an economic system where people get rewarded for how well they perform and how innovative they are, whereas in socialism, people ideally everyone gets treated equally. So Iceland's economic system, it's more socialist. There's a capitalist base. People still get rewarded. There's still a capitalist element. People still get rewarded for innovation and good performance, but there's a socialist base, and that the government interferes a lot in the market and makes sure that everyone gets what they deserve. So State spending on social welfare was 10.9% of their GDP. The public pension replacement rate was 97%. That is huge. Basically, that means the pensions that workers get after they retire is 97% of their average salary while working. It is huge, one of the highest in the world. And the 2020 homelessness rate was 0.1% overall. There, out of that 0.1%, only 15% of the homeless were unsheltered. So all in all, there's just like 60 homeless people or less walking the streets of Iceland, not in shelters. Now, moving to the US, their global innovation index is third, the 98th percentile, even more than Iceland, meaning that because of more technology, they should have more economic, right? And their GDP is a bit higher too, 63,000 compared to 59,000 for Iceland per capita. So they have more resources to solve all these social welfare problems. And they have a more capitalist mixed market, meaning that, yes, there's a socialist element. The government interferes a bit to make sure that everyone gets treated equally. But for the most part, you really get rewarded more if you perform well. If you're poor and undereducated and unqualified and you can't contribute as much to the economy, you will really not be rewarded as much. So state spending on social welfare in the US is 4.67% of GDP. Compare that to 10.9% of Iceland, it's much lower. Their public pension replacement rate is 40%. So after you retire, the pension you get is just 40% of your salary compared to 97% in Iceland. The 2020 homelessness rate is twice that of Iceland, with a lot more people unsheltered. In Iceland, they provide free housing and free shelters for a lot of their homeless. So even out of the homeless, quote unquote, there aren't a lot of people who are unsheltered. In the US, it's very, even the homeless, even the ones who are technically sheltered, they go in and out of shelters a lot of the time. And for the most part, they are on the streets. So why is that? The US has more money per person and they have more technological advancement, right? So why can't they? So why do they not invest more in social welfare? Well, oh, and again, in explaining why technological innovation leads to increasing inequality is because, well, first of all, for example, the invention of the internet. Once the World Wide Web was released, a lot of sectors integrated it into their workplace, right? For example, if you worked as a secretary, suddenly you'd be required to know how to use the internet to search stuff up. You weren't just organizing things and doing research anymore. You'd need to know how to use a computer. If so, stuff like that. Except the poor can't afford computers. They can't afford cell phones. So the more technology that's invented, if the government doesn't handle the situation properly, more of that goes to the wealthy, less of it goes to the poor. So the poor, the underprivileged, who are already at a disadvantage in the job market because of less education, maybe less resources, they suddenly are at a disadvantage in terms of technology too. They can't afford the technology that the wealthy can. So they're at even more of a disadvantage in the job market, which is why it leads to increasing inequality. That's called the digital divide and the technological divide. So the proponents of prioritizing innovation over equity, regardless, argue that, it'll benefit society as a whole. That's the ideas of the capitalists like Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, Alexander Hamilton, the guy who basically made sure that the world followed capitalism. They thought that if you reward innovation, it'll benefit society as a whole. Society will grow, society will prosper. What these guys missed, what the proponents of capitalism miss, is that yes, it'll benefit society as a whole. As a whole, you'll see the metrics of growth, they'll increase, but it's not fair because not only does innovation not guarantee equality, it can increase inequality if welfare programs are not prioritized. There was actually a physicist 1 or 2 years ago who proved mathematically that in a capitalist system, there is no way to avoid perpetually increasing inequality. That's why even in mixed markets, there needs to be a more socialist base with capitalist elements so that innovation still prospers, but you really need to prioritize making sure that welfare and equity are at the forefront of attention. That's That's what Iceland does, and that's why it prospers, whereas the US doesn't. That's why Iceland isn't affected. Like, see, yes, after the internet was invented, inequality shot up, but they leveled out again. After social media rose up, because it's used in workplaces a lot, it rose up, then it leveled out again because the government knows how to handle these issues. They handle equity. They put focus on equity. They put focus on welfare. They even have programs for distributing computers to a lot of underprivileged people. They have programs to provide free internet and broadband access. The US doesn't have that. You'll get rewarded in the US if you perform well and if you're educated, and to do those things, usually you can't be underprivileged. That's why in the US, after the internet was invented, it shot up. It never went down again because they don't handle equity. It's a capitalist way of thinking. Good performance gets rewarded. You don't live up to those standards, you I was thinking of a Filipino phrase. Sorry. If you don't live up to those standards, whatever, you can go on your own. Yeah. But it's not the underprivileged fault if they're not educated enough to afford computers, if they're not if they don't have enough money to afford internet access. It's the government that needs to help provide that. So the main barriers to economic equity really are these capitalist and semi-capitalist markets, resulting in this perpetually increasing income inequality, and that's just accelerated by new innovations in technology that aren't matched by headway in welfare policy. And government budgets often prioritize innovation and growth over social welfare. So not only is it neglecting social welfare, it's neglecting social welfare and funding innovation that can potentially accelerate the growth of inequality. See, so it's like it's a double whammy. It's not only neglected, it's harmed social welfare. And those outside the workforce, such as the elderly or the undereducated who can't get a job or the disabled, they receive less support from social welfare programs in capitalist and semi-capitalist markets because they can't perform, they can't contribute. They can't live up to the standards, but it's not their fault. They're old, they're undereducated, they're disabled. It's not their fault. But capitalist markets, they don't care. So, what are some HAS solutions to economic inequity? First, in markets that really have a capitalist base, more government regulations need to be imposed. That's the goal of some US politicians right now, such as Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is being done right now in New Zealand under the rule of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and it is working. Mixed, largely capitalist mixed markets, they need more government regulations so that equity is prioritized. And in budgets, the government needs to spend more money on prioritizing welfare and equity alongside growth and innovation. Don't discard growth and innovation together, of course. That is not the solution, but the solution is to prioritize welfare and equity more. And people should make social welfare more inclusive of the elderly and the disabled, people not outside the workforce, people who can't contribute, but not because they don't want to, or not because they don't have that drive, but because they were born into the wrong circumstances, or they're at the tail end of their life and they can't contribute anymore. So increase pension rates in countries like the US and the UK. Make it like Iceland, where even after you retire, you get a very big pension. That's the solution here. And technology, of course, technology helps, right? Technology helps with growth, but if you don't prioritize welfare and equity as well, it can even be harmful by increasing inequality. And the things that we need to combat inequality are the humanities and social sciences. We need policymakers, lawmakers, lawyers, activists, people in the humanities and social sciences. Of course, we still need to pay attention to STEM, but it's really, we cannot neglect HAST. It is too important to neglect, too crucial to the continued prosperity of our species. And well, now that that's done, here's the interactive session. So if you have any questions, insights, reactions, you have anything you want to say, good or bad, now is the time to speak up. So first, what have you learned? I'm gonna switch between sharing and uh, am I still sharing? Anyway, first of all, what have you learned? I want to ask you all with what? Oh wait, so I am still sharing or?
No, you are not
No, the
sharing
screen
anymore.
shares
Okay.
it off.
So anyway, what have you learned? With what points here do you agree, and with what points do you disagree throughout my presentation? Literally anyone, you can go. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Oh, you took notes. That's great. Oh, Mariam B. Shihabi. Sure, go ahead.
First of all, hello guys, and
Are you
thank you
there?
so much for this
Camera's on, right?
course, this lesson.
Oh, yeah,
I
no problem.
think since I'm really interested in STEM in general and like to pursue my career in this field, I've really get my sentiment towards this field more stronger. And I think since I've worked on a project concerning the SGDs, I guess that you're right because especially in the point of that STEM, it is also important not just the health field because actually especially in the Arab world and even Asia, I think parents tend to give more focus into the like maybe being a doctor more and into the health field. So I guess that STEM field also should we should also give more focus into the STEM field since it is it is more important in the development of our country. And also concerning the clean energy, I think just for Morocco, I guess for my country, it is now working on this field, which is the clean energy, especially the solar energy, since it's the first country with this a big how to call it um, stadium of
Stadium?
not
Or
stadium, I forgot the word. But anyway,
that's
the
fine.
place where there's a lot of solar energy. So I'm really interested in that field. And I guess it is pretty cool and pretty interesting to really get to know the importance of something because once we get to know the importance of something, we try to more develop our information in it and then we work on um, to develop in it and then we can develop a lot of stuff in our country because for example I guess okay for
Oh,
example like
is it fine if
probably
I
we
cut
don't
you
have
off there?
the
Because I want to
petroleum
have time for everyone else's questions.
energies. uh,
Mariam, is it fine if I cut you off there? I got the gist of what you're saying. I just want to have time for everyone else's insights and questions. Is it fine? Mariam?
I
I'll
think
just,
can you hear me
yeah,
now?
Mariam. I'll just, I'll answer already, all right? Because I want to have time for
Okay.
everyone else. So yes, I absolutely agree. I never said that we shouldn't put focus on STEM. I do like that STEM is getting more focus because, throughout a lot of history, STEM was ridiculed. Copernicus was too afraid to ever express his views that the sun didn't revolve around the earth. Galileo was put under house arrest. For a lot of history, STEM has been neglected, and I'm very happy that it is getting more focused now. I'm not saying it should not be focused on. I'm saying that people should not neglect the humanities for that because nowadays, yeah, the number of STEM people is going up, but the number of has people is going down, and the media consistently ridicules has in favor of STEM. The government doesn't do nearly enough to promote policies. It promotes innovation over uh social welfare and stuff like that. And yeah, I do absolutely think that STEM should be given the same amount of focus it's given now. I just think that has should be given more focus than it's given now. Does that make sense? All right. Anyway, who's next? Shah Saleries one. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. So the presentation was absolutely amazing, and I learned a lot of new stuff. And thank you so much. What I agree with is that hash should be given more importance in terms of how it's dealt with socially as of now. But I also think that instead of seeing them individually as two different entities, we can see them as one that comes together and works with each other. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's not separate. Like if you're doing engineering, it should be mandatory to do something in HAS as well. Like you should be studying political science as well because it's something that you're going to be using throughout your life. So I feel like that's one point that I would like to make. And another thing that I really disagree with is that a lot of countries have interest in promoting climate change and different stuff like that. Looking at from my country's perspective, which is Pakistan, which is a third world country, and we have a lot of issues going on. And as much as we want to support climate change, like we want to be at the frontier of this because we have dealt with so much due to lack of energy. We want to be at the frontier, but at the same time, we have so many pressing issues, such as like which directly are related to humans that are suffering. So we're sort of stuck in this vicious cycle of sorts and don't really have an out of this. So I think it's kind of wrong to put us in the blame when we are already suffering so much and don't really have the resources for that.
All right.
So yeah.
Can I cut you off there because I just want everyone else to have time. So first of all, yeah, absolutely. I never said HAS was more important. I actually didn't say that once throughout my lecture. I consistently said that HAS should be given more attention than it's given right now. And like you said, it needs to work in tandem with STEM. STEM is useless without HAS. HAS is also useless without STEM. They need to work in tandem. I just think that right now, society's putting a lot more focus on STEM than HAS, and I think that needs to change. I don't think either is more important than the other. As to answer your second question, yes, I absolutely agree that governments, generally and around the world, governments take a lot of interest in promoting climate action. I just think that in many respects, they're going about it wrong. I don't think it's a problem with determination or drive. I think it's a problem really with them prioritizing the wrong stuff. Like, for example, a government might prioritize the development of better and more efficient clean energy technologies when it should also be prioritizing subsidizing these technologies so that they can actually be built. You know what I mean? I don't think I'm not putting blame. I'm just saying that I think some governments in some cases could go about climate action better. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you so much.
All right. I saw you taking notes, Ayushi. Oh yeah, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I really, really loved your presentation, everything about it. It felt like, it was just really awesome.
Thanks.
I personally, this is coming from someone who loves both HAS and STEM more or less equally. And what I believe is that too often STEM is put on like some sort of pedestal just because it produces results that you can like show more solid results than
Exactly.
what HAS produces. And I personally think that's not what people should be doing, and that they're both equally important, more or less. And I've recently been looking into STEAM, which is like science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And I think that it's something that's like really interesting that's coming up. And when it comes to climate change, I personally believe that in my country, at least the youth, I'm referring to the youth particularly, a lot of us know that it exists and that it's important, but we don't really know what we can do on a personal level. So, do you have any comments on that?
You mean as youth or when you grow up or both?
As youth?
Well, as youth, I think a good way to promote climate action is, well, if you can, convince your parents to use renewable energy if you can in your home. My my household runs partially off solar energy. Sometimes it runs entirely off solar energy when it's not cloudy. Another thing I guess is if you know any organizations that like youth organizations that are dedicated to promoting climate action, you can definitely join those. I know there are actually existing youth organizations. I'm not sure in India, but I know in US there are existing youth organizations that have successfully lobbied like Congress and put about changes in climate legislation. Or just as simple as, educating other people. I think that's a very important thing to do. And then when you grow up, of course, there's developing clean energy technology. There's also going into policy, maybe environmental law, something like that, making sure, clean energy is mandated to be used more. So stuff like that. Thanks for saying that about my presentation. I really appreciate it. It's almost 10. So yeah, I just want to add that I'm going to share. I just want to add that if you have any further questions, any further inquiries, you just want to discuss more with me, ask any questions related to this PowerPoint or not, just want to share something, you can contact me at lm.varona@outlook.com. That's L, not I, lm.varona@outlook.com. And if anyone has another question, I guess I have time for one more. But yeah, after that, if you just want to discuss any more, you can contact me at that email. How has is important and we cannot make STEM useful for pub? Are you asking me why that's true? Because that's what my PowerPoint is all about. Ayat Fatima.
Okay, should I go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I was asking like, what should be the majority of people like? Should be majority of people in STEM fields, or should be the majority of people be in HAS, or
I
should
think
be they
I
or
think
they should be equal? Like,
yeah, I think they're equally important and they equally need focus. I think on a case by case basis, for example, um maybe certain engineering fields would need more manpower than certain psychology fields. I think that's definitely true. But I think as a whole, HAS and STEM are equally as important. I think the problem right now is not per se that STEM has a larger workforce than HAS, because in some cases, STEM really does require larger manpower. I think the problem is the perception, regardless of the numbers in the workforce, that STEM is more important than HAS and that people are neglecting the role HAS is playing in society. So I don't think it's a problem of more people per se, more people in the workforce. I think it's a problem of um
the
the perception. Someone
yeah.
asked, can I send the PowerPoint? Well, first of all, it's in the Teams channel here. It's under files. I uploaded both the PowerPoint format and the PDF format, but you can also email me at the email I provided. Here you go. Wait, I'll just look.com.
Yeah, I can also
L.
share your email and the presentation in our Telegram group chat. So
Yeah, sure. And I
everyone can get
uploaded the PowerPoint also to the files of the channel, my discussions channel in the
Mhm.
Microsoft Teams. But if you
Yeah,
can't access
thank
that
you.
for some reason, just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. I guess if you guys have somewhere else to go, we can end this. Or do you not have anywhere else to go? Do they have anywhere else to go, Sophia? Like, is there something after this?
Yeah, they have another lesson in 15 minutes.
Well, it was really great presenting to you all. I really loved the feedback. Thanks, guys. I really loved it. I think you brought up really great points. I really appreciated how you appreciated my PowerPoint. And yeah, see you. I hope some of you email me, ask me some questions. See ya. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, before I forget, can we take a picture like with everyone's faces?
Well, that's great, Ayushi. That's great. Really nice info. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, just the picture. Wait. I will together mode maybe. Yeah.
All right. One more thing. I just want to share this quote. I almost forgot. Almost forgot. Wait. One more quote. I have a quote here. Um, Thank you for listening. And I just wanted to share this quote. The calling of the humanities is to make us truly human in the best sense of the word by J. Irwin Miller. Like, STEM gives us the capability. STEM makes us capable of more. The humanities can make us better people capable of using that, if that makes sense. So yeah, thank you all for listening.
Yeah.
Stop.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. I'll
Yeah.
leave my
Bye.
inbox open. I'll be checking it. See you. Oh, wait, are you raising your hand? Someone's raising their hand, or is that just leftover? Anyway, bye bye. You can end this when you want.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.